Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. Each week we get to hear the journey, see the footprints of the Holy Spirit as He touches the lives of men and women to awaken them to a deeper walk with Christ, which calls them to a deeper walk with the church, often to a church they didn't expect. But the reason we call it The Journey Home is because a place that they recognize as home. And our guest tonight is Greg Graham, a former Evangelical. Greg, welcome to the Journey Home program.
Thank you, Marcus.
It's good to have you here. You know, it's a small world, but I'm amazed more and more how we'll talk to the guests and our paths have crossed at one time or another over the years. Because we're all working in the same way, a love for Christ, love for the church, journeys in and out of the church. So our paths did cross a couple years ago.
Yeah. It's good to see you again.
Well, it's good to have you here. Let me get out of the way and invite you to start us on the journey.
Well, I was born in Abilene, Texas, in West Texas. My parents were from that area. Dad was raised Baptist. My mom was raised Methodist. When I was a year old, we moved to the big city, Dallas, and
that's Bible Belt, right?
Oh yes. But we didn't go to church a lot when I was little. Every now and then, and it was not something I enjoyed doing because I didn't know anybody. But I remember my grandmother. I was probably about 7 years old, talking to me about Jesus and saying that, how Jesus was the Son of God. He died on the cross for our sins, and if we would believe in Him, we could go to heaven. And
was she a good Church of Christ, good Baptist,
she
or
was
good
Methodist? She was Methodist.
Say that was Abilene done.
Yes, she was Methodist, and both of my grandmothers were regular churchgoers. I saw them as church people. I knew that was a good thing for them, but I was interested in science. Even as a little kid, I had books about rockets and jet engines, and I saw the Apollo 8 mission where they went and circled the moon, and then Apollo 11 where they landed on the moon. I wanted to be an astronaut. That was my interest, and that's where I saw the future. I was all interested in the future. I started getting interested in science fiction, and so the religion thing didn't, to me, seem to fit. I liked science class in school, and we had a different story about how the world began. So by the time I was in high school, I think I wasn't militant about it. I didn't broadcast it, but if somebody was to talk to me seriously, I'd say, I don't really believe in God. And I don't think He exists. Well, one of my favorite...
Were you finding that your professors at high school and everything were pushing you in that direction, and your science classes were pushing you in that direction? Or that just wasn't really part of the conversation?
No. So we lived at that time in Mesquite, Texas, east of Dallas, pretty conservative area, and so I can't remember anybody really pushing that way. Although I do remember in history, in grade school, social studies and all, learning about the Catholic Church, and it was not seen as a good force in history. But not Christianity in general.
Okay. All right.
So, I was into science fiction. An author I really liked was Isaac Asimov.
Sure.
And not only did he write fiction, but he wrote a lot of science stuff. He was a chemistry professor, and very interesting. I enjoyed reading. I had a book of essays of his, and the last one was called The Judo Argument, and it's got into arguments for God's existence, trying to use science to prove that God exists. And he goes through and tries and debunks these arguments. And I wasn't very interested in the article, but I was reading it, so I finished the book. But at the end of the article, I was surprised. He said, although I don't these arguments for God's existence don't work, science does not prove that God does not exist. From a scientific point of view, it's an open question. And I wanted to be, I was probably 15 at the time, I wanted to be a good scientifically minded person, and so I thought, well, it should be an open question for me. And I thought at one point, well, I should do a survey of religions and see if any of them are true. And another thing that was, I think I was beginning to have a little hunger for something more. I was a big Star Wars fan. That had come out just a few years before, and this concept of the Force that was in Star Wars, which was a space, show, but they had this mystical aspect, and that kind of intrigued me. And so I wondered, maybe there is something more out there than what science tells us. And so it's kind of in the back of my mind. Well, when the summer before my sophomore year in high school, my dad brought home an Apple II computer, these new microcomputers, and I wanted to learn everything I could about it. And I took this programming class, the one class they had in my high school, became friends with another student who was into this stuff, and he would tell me stories about Mike. So my friend was Chad. Mike was this guy who'd taken it the semester before, and some of his exploits and programming. And so I like to meet this guy. Well, it turned out the three of us, our teacher took us to University of North Texas for a programming contest. And we did that, and we had a good time. On the way back, he drove us in his car. On the way back, Mike had this tape, and he asked the teacher, could I play this tape? And I said, sure, sure. He starts playing this music, and it's kind of a folksy rock guy singing. And he's singing about Moses in the wilderness. And I'm trying to figure out, what kind of music is this? This doesn't sound like religious music. I'm not even sure, is he making fun of Moses, or is this, does he believe this stuff? And it was intriguing. Well, then the next year, I had a physics class, in my junior year, physics class with Mike and Chad were both in that class. And another friend of mine, Doug, who I knew had recently become interested in religion. And Mike would take his Bible with him to school, carry it around. And that intrigued me, because I knew Mike was really smart. It turned out he ended up being the valedictorian of the class. And so this combination intrigued me. One day, and I don't remember now the chronology of how all these things fit together, but I know one day the three of them appeared, the doorbell rang, and they were on my doorstep. And Mike said, has a very interesting sense of humor. He said, we're the God Squad, you're coming with us. And so they took me to this teen evangelistic event. And the guy, this is a lot of fun stuff, but then he gave a little talk. It was very simple. He took out his wallet and he said, this is me, and this wallet are my sins. And here's Jesus, and he took away my sins. And I thought, that's an interesting way to put that. I wonder, I was open, but I still had this question, how can I know this is true? How does this fit with science? Mm-hmm. And so I was open. Sometime after that, I believe, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I remember the event. It was probably before physics class. I was at Chad's desk. He had a desk at the front of the room. And he was showing me things in the Bible where there were Old Testament prophecies of Jesus and how Jesus fulfilled them. And something happened to me, and it's just, I knew this book had to be a supernatural book. These authors were, separated by centuries, but it's all connected. And like I said, all at once, I just believed this was true. And so I wanted to know everything I could about the Bible. And Jesus, I know he's important too. I can't really relate to Jesus. I've neglected to mention, we did start going to church regularly when I was 10 years old at a Presbyterian church. Neighbors had invited us, and that my parents felt comfortable there, and so we went. We were doing that, and I was fine to go, but I wasn't really getting into it. But there was a portrait of Christ in the hallway that was kind of effeminate looking, and it just was not an attractive character to me. But I was open and wanted to learn all I could. I started watching TV shows, and one of them was done in Dallas, Zola Levitt Live. And Zola Levitt was a convert to Christianity from Judaism. And he would talk a lot about the Old Testament and how how things in the Old Testament are fulfilled in the New. And I was liking that a lot. Also talked about future prophecy. And so I got into all this end time stuff. Hal Lindsey.
Yeah, you're right down there in the backyard of that, right?
Yes. And so that was something I was really getting into. And so I'm learning I'm reading the Bible because of that. I got a Schofield Reference Bible. My friends went to a Bible church, and so they said, this is what you need to have. And
our guest is Greg Graham. So you're given the textbook of the whole rapture dispensationalist tradition is in the Schofield Bible, right?
Yes. And so still going to the Presbyterian church with my family, but I'm learning this other aspect. And my parents are getting a little concerned about some of the stuff I'm getting in the mail from some of these organizations. Well, one other thing that was influential to me, well, a couple of things. The whole Christian rock music thing was my friends were into, and so I was getting learning more about Christ through that. Also read the Chronicles of Narnia.
Sure.
And where I couldn't relate to Jesus, I could relate to Aslan.
Yeah.
And I saw an aspect of Christ through that character that really helped me in my relationship. Well, I went off to college. My friends were worried about me because I was going to a secular college, Texas A&M. And
science.
Engineering, computer science.
Gotcha.
And I was a little concerned. Their concern infected me. I did not want to lose my faith. I remember the first Sunday I was there, I had looked up a church, Grace Bible Church. I was going to go there. Freshmen had to park, I lived in the dorm, freshmen had to park like a mile away from the dorm. I hadn't been to my car all week. I got out there, I had 2 flat tires. I thought, I can't miss church this first Sunday. Satan is going to, trying to keep me away from church. So I walked to church, got there after Sunday school was over, but I had made it. And so it was important to me to, keep this going.
I'm going to interrupt you. Would you said Aslan was drawing you to Christ, though?
Yes.
Would you say at that point you had you had major faith in Christ up to this point, had you?
I would say sometime in my junior year in high school, I had come to faith.
Okay. All right.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And
right.
I was owning this.
Gotcha.
It just was, a lot of little pieces coming together. And so, it was important to me to keep in the faith. Next Sunday, I'm on my way to make the hike out to the car, going down the stairs in my dorm, carrying my Bible, and there's a guy coming up the stairs with a Bible. And he says, "Are you going to church?" And I said, "Yeah." "Where are you going?" "Grace Bible Church." "I am too. You want to ride?" And this guy was a sophomore, and he kind of took me under his wing, and they had a dorm Bible study. He was in a nearby dorm Bible study, and anyway, I found Texas A&M to be a great Christian climate, and so it was really never a problem. And I learned a lot from the Bible Church and these other friends. Until the end of my freshman year, and a couple of my friends started getting into this argument over theology and over what was being taught at the Bible Church by the college minister. The opponents would call it easy believism, that once you accept Christ, it doesn't matter what you do after that, you are going to heaven. And the other friend was a big fan of John MacArthur. He had a drawer full of MacArthur tapes that he had listened to. And MacArthur was preaching this lordship salvation. To truly receive Christ, you have to receive him as Lord, which is going to change your life. You're not going to go out and commit murder and all these things and just like nothing ever happened if you really receive Christ. And I realized this was an important question. And I wrestled with, how do I find an answer? And I started being concerned about what was being taught at this church. I still like the pastor there as the college class. And so I got involved in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship as an alternative. And there we had Presbyterians, Episcopalians, Baptists, Pentecostals, one Catholic member. And I got exposed to all these people who loved Jesus, but with these different backgrounds. And we stayed away from the topics of division, and focused a lot on evangelism, so on. And so, and this topic of what was going on at Grace Bible Church came up at a conference with some other people that were going to that church, and the staff worker, I got in the conversation, staff worker told me, if you're looking for another church, you may want to check out Westminster Presbyterian. It was a PCA church, Presbyterian Church in America, different from the Presbyterian church I grew up in. And so I started going there. Well, about this time, a friend from high school transferred to A&M. So she had graduated from high school a year before me, went to community college for a couple of years, and then transferred. And my roommate at the time was also from our high school, and so we thought, well, we need to take Tony under our wing. And she was in a nearby dorm, and so we would go to lunch with her at the dining hall, and she didn't have a car, so when I would go home, I would give her rides home. And I knew her sister really more than her in high school, but we started becoming friends. And on one of these trips, I decided I need to witness to Tony, because their family was unchurched. They didn't go to church. And I knew that. And I finally worked up the courage to say, do you ever think about spiritual things? It's one of the things they taught us to do in these InterVarsity evangelism books. And she said, I've been waiting for somebody to talk to me about this stuff. And so we just really got into it. And so she began a journey into faith at that. Well, she was already searching, but we were now kind of going through this together. So that's when we graduated. She went back to Mesquite. I recommended she go to Mesquite Bible Church, where my friends had gone, and I got a job in Fort Worth and found a PCA church that I was going to. I won't go into the story about how this happened. Anyway, we ended up getting married. Yeah. Well, I will say I won tickets to a concert and took her with me, and at that point I started thinking, maybe we should get married. And a year later we were at the Bible church. But I was going to the PCA church, and this church was very Calvinistic. The pastor was really into theology. I was learning all this stuff about Reformed theology, and I thought, this question, these doctrinal issues, I just need to look back in history. And I was reading. I read a little bit of Martin Luther, and reading more secondary sources, Reformed theology sources, but still very much rooted in the Reformers and the Puritans. And so I was thinking, okay, that can help me with these issues. And I was getting into that. Tony, going to the PCA church with me, isn't really quite fitting in. Then I get a job change. We move back to Dallas from Fort Worth, and try another PCA church there. But after a while, we visited the Bible church, and they were so glad to see us, and they were so warm. And I thought, this is going to be a better church home for us. But what about these doctrinal things? And I came to decide, I don't know if I'll ever figure out these things, and I'll just go along with their, because to be a member you had to ascribe to their statement of faith, and so I'll just do that. I'm just not really that sure. And I came to think, although I had found theology interesting, study of theology seemed to conflict with being a good Christian. It just leads to arguments, and so I decided to just kind of put that aside. We were happy in that church for a while, and then, but I was on this worship team where we would work out the worship of what we're going to do in the worship service. And we're trying to figure out ways to get the congregation more involved, because it's such a passive experience for the congregation. You sang a few hymns, and then you sat and listened. And our leader bought this Encyclopedia of Worship, edited by Robert Weber. And his idea was, let's each of us pick one of these volumes and read it and do a report to the group. So the volume I was given was, I think, called 10 Millennia of Worship. Sorry, 10 Centuries of Worship, or I don't remember, but it was about the whole history of Christian worship. And I'm looking through it, it's all about liturgy. And I'm surprised that there's this language of liturgy, and it's not just this arbitrary thing that people do. There's, sort of a system to it, and a logic behind it. And anyway, I bring this up, and it's interactive. It's like a script for a play, and there's parts that different people play, including the congregation. And so I told the group, this is a way you can get people involved. And the pastor said, no way we're having liturgy at this church. So I just kind of dropped it there. Tony started listening to some tapes she got from a friend by this man named Malcolm Smith, a British guy, and she was really appreciating. They were opening up to her a depth to the Christian life that she really wasn't seeing in where we were, and it was she was liking it. And I listened to the tapes, and I thought they were good too. And we got his tape catalog. He had a series of tapes called "The Power of the Holy Spirit in Liturgy." Oh, that's interesting. So I got these tapes and listened to them, and again, it was another little thing. And this all kind of reminded me of something my friend Mike, this guy in high school, who we continued to be friends with. They were at our wedding and all this. He was a classics major, and during all this, he started reading the Church Fathers. And he told me he'd studied about the Council of Nicaea, and the Bible Church people in this, the people that acted like we do in the Bible Church, were the Arians. They were the more Scripture alone people, and the Catholics, who believe what we believe about the Trinity, were appealing to tradition. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then he said, and another interesting thing, a friend of mine was telling me about this Orthodox bishop who spoke to him, who told him, you Protestants worship with your mind, we worship with our whole bodies. I thought, yeah, we do just worship with our minds. There's something in there. So these were things brewing in my mind. Well, we found out that Malcolm Smith was giving a retreat in the Texas Hill Country. So we said, let's go to this, meet him in person. And so we go, and we walk into this room. I hear this man speaking in a British accent, and he's wearing a Roman collar. And find out he's a bishop in the Charismatic Episcopal Church. And so I'm, what is all this? And during this retreat, he gave a talk about the Book of Common Prayer and how that revolutionized his prayer life. He was a Pentecostal preacher and but an Anglican minister told him about the Book of Common Prayer, started using it, and it made his prayer life much more regular instead of the up and down of the Pentecostal experience. And I thought, I need that. And so I got me a Book of Common Prayer. He also did what he called a teaching Eucharist. He went through the Episcopal Eucharist service and explained everything as he was doing it. And it was very interesting. And they had a very strong view of the Eucharist, that this was the real presence of Christ. And so when we get home, I start Googling about Charismatic Episcopal Church, and I find out there's a parish that meets in Plano, and so we went. Well, Tony and I were 2 out of 6 people in attendance, very small. But the priest was very friendly. He took us to lunch, and we talked, and he said, well, theologically, because I had these theology questions, he said, I'm not much of a theologian. We're kind of like the Orthodox. I said, okay, I need to check out the Orthodox. And end up calling this Orthodox church, Greek Orthodox church. The assistant priest says, come over, and you and your wife, and I'll give you a tour of the church, and that way when you come, you'll be more familiar with what's going on. And so he spent a lot of time with us, gave me a book, I bought another book, and I started reading all this stuff. And it's just there's a depth there that I was hungry for. And
when we pause there, Greg, we'll
sure.
take time to take a break. But it's interesting to see how this the tweak of the open to liturgy has just expanded.
Yes, yes.
Your hunger for
Yeah.
something deeper. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Be with you just a minute. Welcome back to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host, and our guest is Greg Graham. And it's interesting to see how just that little tweak on liturgy has really been opening, drawing you and your wife in a different journey. And you were being introduced into the Orthodox Church and a charismatic Episcopal Catholic at all?
No. I still thought the Catholic Church was a problem. I wasn't really raised with much anti-Catholic bias. One of the best families in our neighborhood was Catholic, but it still was not there. And even though I had the one Catholic friend, I come to the conclusion that the Catholic Church is, not teaching the truth, but Catholics were still Christians despite that. Sometimes, could become Christians. And it was because, this faith alone thing was so important.
Yep.
And so, I thought I should steer clear of the Catholic Church, but I thought the Orthodox would be safe. Okay. And so I started getting into that. A coworker of mine was in the process of converting from Episcopalian to Orthodox. And he said, you need to go to the Bible study at the OCA Cathedral, Orthodox Church in America. Their cathedral for the southern region is in Dallas, and it's taught by the Archbishop. And so I started going to that. The Archbishop, Dimitri, at that time, was a former Baptist. He was raised Baptist. He converted as a teenager, and he's since passed away. He was an older man. He was probably in his 70s back then. But he was teaching through Romans, and so Romans is the Calvinist book, and I get Romans from this other perspective that's not Calvinist, and it made sense. I could see it, and so God put me in this what I thought was a safe place to see really more of the Catholic faith, but from the outside of the Catholic Church. Well, I was all interested in looking into let's become Orthodox, but for Tony it was too foreign, and she said, Malcolm Smith's not Orthodox, and I said, well, he practically is. I was thinking theologically they're the same. That's what they said. But she said, but he's not Orthodox. And so it just came to me, well, maybe it would be better to look into the Charismatic Episcopal Church. Well, I thought the Plano parish was a bust, but they had their cathedral for the area was in Sherman, which is about an hour north of Dallas. And so we decided to drive up to Sherman one day, and it was a bigger parish. It's still, Catholic standards small. It was maybe 100 people in attendance, but beautiful music. They were very good in this liturgy that they'd put together. The bishop was a very good preacher, and it's like, we found the place. And so we started going to church there. We actually ended up moving to Sherman. They had this seminary program that was designed, because being such a small denomination, a lot of the priests were bivocational. They had other jobs to support themselves. And so their seminary was, you just went to class one weekend a month, and then you would do readings and writing assignments that month until the next meeting. And so I could do that while I was still working. And as I learned about the sacraments, this idea of sacramental ministry was very appealing to me. It was more than a Protestant pastor who's basically a preacher and manager. And that didn't appeal to me, but here I can give people Jesus in a tangible way. And so I started getting interested in going that direction. So we're doing that, and it's going on fine until I took a class. They called it was a church history class. The three ancient traditions: Anglican, Orthodox, and Catholic. And we met for 3 weekends, so we covered each one in a weekend. And the first one, Anglican, one of the things we had to read was St. Bede the Venerable, history of the English people and Christianity in England. And one of his big concerns in this history is the Celtic people were already Christian, but then Rome sent missionaries to the Anglo-Saxons, and they become Christian through the Roman Church. But the Celtic Christians were not in full communion with Rome. And to Bede, this was a huge problem. And so he really shows how they end up coming together at the Synod of Whitby, and they are become united. And that made an impression on me that was so important that they be in union. Okay, then we had the Orthodox unit, didn't learn that much in that. Then the Catholic unit. We read two books, The Spirit and Forms of Protestantism by Louis Boyer.
Oh, yeah.
And he opened up all that was wrong with Protestantism. Yeah. Well, we considered ourselves, we didn't call ourselves Protestant. We said we were Catholic, but not Roman. And so everybody took to that book. But the other book we read was The Spirit of Catholicism, I think that was called, by Carl Adam.
Yes.
And he was much more why the Roman Catholic Church is the church. And I thought, he's making some good points.
You were given 2 powerful books.
Yes. I still wonder why they gave us those
books.
Those
are 2 powerful books to give together. Yeah.
And so we come back for our meeting, we've read all this stuff. Everybody loves the Boyer book, but they hate the Adams book. I thought, and I'm not saying, it was actually pretty good. I thought he treated it well. And so this starts me thinking, I had a big concern about the unity in the church. And one of the things we learned, we studied the church fathers a lot. Ignatius of Antioch wrote early 2nd century or late 1st century about how important the bishop is. And that you have unity in the local church around the bishop. And we talked about it's not a committee, because they can split into factions. It's not a profession of faith, because you can disagree on how you interpret it. You need a man that can judge disputes and be a living witness. And so I start thinking, that's where the Pope comes in the Catholic Church. Because our bishops we claimed valid apostolic succession, and that was a very important thing.
In the Charismatic Episcopal.
In the Charismatic Episcopal Church. Right. But we weren't in communion with these other Anglicans. And we weren't in communion with the Orthodox or the Catholics, whom we considered brothers, but we didn't completely agree with them. And I thought, how do you get these groups together? And it seemed like the Pope was the answer. And so I started thinking, what I'm going to do about this. And I read some more things, and I come to this conviction that I need to become Catholic. And so
That's a pretty big jump there.
Yes, yeah, because, yeah, I
But
still
I mean, it was
thought
a
there were
realization of the
problems.
issue of authority,
Exactly.
of
Yes.
the necessity of authority for unity.
Yeah, and there were various things going on, but it really was, that was the key issue. And I still had a lot of problems with the Catholic Church. I thought they put too much emphasis on Mary and some other issues, but I couldn't say no to this thing. And anyway, it took really a couple of years. I didn't tell anybody about it except our bishop and our seminary mentor, and they tried to talk me out of it. And they gave me all these reasons why I should stay, and one of the reasons I should stay was there were people in the Charismatic Episcopal Church that were working with Cardinal Keeler in Baltimore on some kind of intercommunion arrangement. And so it's like, this is the key to unity, but it fell apart. Our bishops didn't want to make the kinds of changes that would be required by the Catholic Church for that to work. And also a interpersonal thing came up where I started thinking, it's going to be difficult for us to continue going here. And so what do I do? And I realized now's the time to make that change. And so I wasn't sure what to do. We didn't know any, by this time we had moved back to the Dallas area because of job changes, and I didn't know any Catholics in our area. And so I just go to a church. It's November. They tell me, well, RCIA has already started. You'll need to come back next year. You can attend classes, just to observe. That was discouraging. Yep. But my seminary mentor said, check out St. Mary the Virgin parish in Arlington. They were Episcopalians. The whole parish converted. And so the priest there gave us private instruction, and we were received into the Catholic Church in Easter of 2006. And Tony, when I told her, I think we need to become Catholic, she said, all right, let's do it. So that was never an issue. It was a confirmation.
You were both seeking all this time.
Yes,
so, yeah.
yes. And it really was a confirmation, because there had been other times where it was her unrest really that pushed us in this direction. We didn't know that's where it was headed. But now she was at really peace with this. And so we did that. And turned out we didn't stay long term with St. Mary the Virgin. It was an hour drive from where we lived. We found another parish nearby that we liked. And I got involved in a ministry. They had Christ Renews His Parish, where you go on a retreat and you put on a retreat. And you spend a year with these guys on your team. And in my retreat, I gave a talk about the Bible. And the guys said, received it very well. And they said, you need to do more of this kind of stuff. And but this was a big question. I had been interested in becoming a priest. Yeah. We actually left 3 months before I was going to be ordained as a deacon, but I couldn't go through with that when my heart was elsewhere. So I was figuring out, what do I do with this calling? And so I decided I'm going to go to get a degree in Catholic theology, study theology from a Catholic point of view. My interest in theology had been reawakened by studying the Church Fathers, and now here's a safe place to explore theology. When we became Catholic, this burden fell off of my shoulders of trying to figure out everything on my own.
Yeah.
You know, when I had earlier had this epiphany that I could trust the Bible was the Word of God, and now I wanted to learn all about the Bible. I had a similar feeling about the church. The Catholic Church was something I could trust. I didn't understand everything. I didn't understand Marian devotion. I would accept the Marian dogmas because the church taught them, but you know, I just knew this was something that I could grow into, and I could relax about this. And so I went through this program at University of Dallas. Well, when I was looking into the program, they had 3 different ways I could study theology, and so I'm wondering which one to choose. So I'm emailing the department head, and he said, well, we need to talk about this in person or over the phone. I'm having a party at my house this Saturday with the grad students. You ought to come and meet who would be your fellow students, and then we can talk. So I did. Well, I show up at his house, and I'm early, and these people drive up in this car wearing black and white habits. These Cistercian monks, these young Cistercian monks, they were in formation, well, young Cistercian monks, and then 2 older monks that were professors at UD. All were there, and I start talking to them, and there's a lot of talk about the Cistercian Abbey across the highway.
Yeah.
And they had this first Friday Mass in the evening, Friday evening, and how beautiful it was. There was a choir from University of Dallas that sang there, and so I decided I need to attend this Mass. And I walk into the Abbey Church, and I recognize someone from my parish there, and I sit next to him. After Mass, everybody goes out onto the lawn. It was a beautiful Mass. Everybody goes out on the lawn, the monks come out, and everybody's visiting, and my friend is talking to one of the monks, and he introduces me. This is Father Peter. He's the headmaster of their school they have here, and I'm an alumnus of this school. And he's telling Father Peter, you know, I would love to teach at the school, teach history. And he said, we'd be great. We'd love to hire you. We just don't have any openings. The only thing we have is this IT position. Well, my ears perked up because I was working as a software developer in Denton, and it was quite a ways from Denton to Irving. I was thinking, I'm going to need to find a job in the Irving area. I wanted us to move to that area while I was going to school. And so I ended up applying for that job, got that job, and that's still where I work today. It was going to be this temporary thing for me, but I just fell in love with the place.
I've been there myself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I finished my degree, and recently they have let me teach theology electives. So I teach computer science and theology, and it's been it's been a welcoming thing for Tony and I. We often go to Mass at the Abbey, although you know we have our parish as well. I was wondering, you know, what am I going to do in the church? I didn't know, but God provided something.
God provides a way and guide you all around. One of the questions that going all the way back to the beginning of your journey, one of the things that had pulled you out of your earliest Christian faith was this question of science and faith.
I'm glad
Have you found that as a fulfillment in the Catholic Church?
Yes, and before he became Catholic, I started reading some G.K. Chesterton, and he wrote a book about Thomas Aquinas, and I read that, and I just really related to him, and so he was my confirmation saint, and it's just yes, this idea of faith and reason. St. John Paul II talks about the two wings that lift us up to God, faith and reason, and it's that really came together in my life. I had not really found satisfactory answers. This was something that kept coming up. Every now and then I would find an evangelical who would admit that they believed in evolution, or that the earth is older than 6,000 years. But you had to be careful who you said that around, because some people were very defensive about that. And I just, didn't know. But the Catholic Church really has given me a good way to put those things together.
As you were talking in the beginning, that reminded me of an article I just saw, and I can recommend it, by a good guest on the Journey Home program, Joseph Pierce. I just noticed he has an article out today called "Science is Good, but Not Scientism."
Yes, and that's really the problem. This idea that science is the answer for everything.
Yep.
It's a great tool for understanding the mechanics of the universe, but it doesn't tell us about the deeper things. And trying to use it to answer those questions doesn't work very well.
And even as Isaac Asimov had mentioned in the article you had said, that these arguments are limited, but science doesn't disprove the reality of God.
Well, now in my interest in Aquinas, I'm interested in philosophy, and Aquinas has a way that you can know about God's existence apart from revelation, just through human reason. These 5 ways. In fact, I'm going to use this book. Matt Fradd wrote this book, Does God Exist? And it's a very friendly way of going through these 5 ways. And so that's what I'm going to use for the course I'm teaching in the fall. I'm really looking forward to it.
And your wife and you both came into church together then?
Yes. And for her, it has been, I think, a real solid foundation and a real home for her, for both of us. It really is. We loved watching your show during our whole process, and it really was a journey home for us, that feeling of being home.
Did you find your commitment to science helpful, or a barrier to understanding the Catholic understanding of sacraments?
This idea that Christ became man, and in him, humanity and divinity were brought together, and the importance God placed on the physical was just made a lot of sense to me about the sacraments, and going back to what it was Archbishop Dimitri, by the way, who had made that comment that we worship God with our whole bodies, and that just really made a lot of sense, to have these physical things, that God would work through physical things. And then Aquinas talks about primary and secondary causes, that God is the primary cause of everything, but he uses secondary causes, and he uses all these things in our universe. They do their thing. So when science says, this is how a solar system is formed, the solar system is formed, or whatever, that is true, but those are the secondary causes they're describing. God is then what enables all of that to be able to work at all. And so he's always there through everything. And so even if human life did come about through evolution, it was something that God was always doing.
Right.
There's no conflict.
Right. If you're going to leave God out of the equation, then when you see similarities between species, you're assuming, well, they came from each other, or they just kind of happened. But then you can recognize it's the same mind, the creative spirit of God is behind every bit of creation. So of course you're going to see similarities.
Oh yeah.
It's the one source.
Yeah. I thought even before I had these answers that, as an engineer, that you see similarities in General Motors cars because it's the same engineering teams behind them. And so.
Well, Greg, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
sharing your journey with us, and our prayers are with you and your family as you continue in IT there at the school. Very good, very good. God bless you. And thank you for joining us on this episode of The Journey Home. I do pray that Greg's journey is an encouragement to you. God bless you. See you next week.